New research has found that there is a real risk of a new generation of pension inequality emerging if no action is taken.
Yes, all to do with sort of parenting,
I think it's to do particularly with if you stop work to have a baby, and maybe if your partner as well stops work to help parent, particularly in those early months, then you're not contributing in to the pension scheme. And you may find that later on, it may not be desperately important to you at the time, but later on when you want your pension, you might find that seriously affected.
Yeah, but this is around government pension, which might not exist actually.
Well, that's
by the
what
time.
I was thinking. Should we talk to pension expert Tom Mcphail? Hello there, Tom. Hi. Can you explain what the problem is, first of all? And then why should we really worry about it when we all feel that we're probably never going to get a pension?
Well, hopefully most of us will get a pension. The problem is that, I mean, you've already kind of touched on it. There's that gap in middle life, particularly in people's 40s, particularly when women tend to earn less money than men. And with pensions, more than anything, what you get out is a function of what you put in. And investment returns matter, and the tax relief matters, and so on, and the pension you're in matters. But more than anything, it's what you put in that matters. And there's still today quite a big gap in middle life between what women get put into their pensions compared to men. So overall participation rates and numbers of people in pensions are roughly equal between men and women. So it's not that women aren't joining pensions, but overall there's about a £10 billion a year gap in workplace pensions in terms of the contributions between what women are getting and men are getting. And that is largely down to that gap in income. I'm not sure we're ever entirely going to close that gap. It'd be great if we do, but if we don't fix the contribution, the earnings gap, we won't fix the pensions gap.
All right, so this is a workplace pension, so it's in effect a private pension we're talking about here rather than the government pension. But it's not. This is where the gap between the sexes gets complicated, because it's not about people earning less for the same job, because that would be illegal. It's more that women are in lower paid jobs. Is that the issue?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. If you look at the state pension, actually now women's and men's pensions are largely equal. But baked into the system, things happen slowly with pensions. They happen over decades. And think back over the 90s and the 80s and so on. There's been a period of time where typically women were earning quite a lot less than men. And that's still playing through the system. So the people coming up towards retirement now, their pensions have been built up through those decades. And there the difference between men and women was more acute. So this gap is not going to close anytime soon. Now, today, it's about that motherhood penalty that a lot of women still pay around the ages of 30s and 40s, when quite often they're earning less than their partners. And as a consequence, they've got less money going into pensions, because pension contributions typically are calculated as a percentage of pay. So, yeah, we're talking about the private pensions and the contribution rates going in. Now, there are other disparities in the system. Self-employed people get a really raw deal. Most self-employed people are not saving for retirement at all. That's another big problem. There's a huge gap between public sector workers and private sector workers. I mean, to illustrate that, a woman working in the public sector gets, on average, pension contributions that are 3 times greater than the average man working in the private sector. So there are disparities all across the system. But, we're looking at men and women here today. And unless you change the function of how parents operate, and unless you can change the earnings penalty that women suffer as a result of motherhood, you're not going to fix that pensions gap entirely. There are other things couples can do. For example, a man can put money into a pension on behalf of his wife. So you can sort of redress the balance a little bit yourself. And the government's tried to boost childcare resources to help women get back to work earlier. But, there's still that motherhood premium, and it's very difficult to get over.
And it's a very busy time of your life when you've just had a child, isn't it? That in that middle sector, as you were saying, you're very, very busy. You're hopefully building your career. You're having a child. You're thinking of buying a house, all the rest of it. You don't think about pensions, do you, until later on when you might get a nasty shock. Is that what you come across?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly truth in that. I'd also argue that for some couples, there is a recognised trade-off here. Look, I'll be the primary caregiver for the children. You be the primary breadwinner. Now, if you're doing that with the income and the work, you can also do that with a pension. So, and particularly if a man is a higher rate taxpayer because he's earning more money, he gets better tax breaks. So it makes sense to build up a pension for him. So the other thing you can do is look at the household pension wealth and say, look, between the two of you, have you saved enough to provide for the two of you in retirement? Now, that might be a slightly unfashionable view in some quarters, but that can work for some people. So you don't necessarily have to totally equalise the pension benefits in the same way you don't totally equalise the childcare giving responsibilities.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's key to all of this, isn't it? That you need to look at the household rather than the individual with all of this, because as you say, otherwise you're never going to balance it out completely. It seems almost impossible to address it in that sense. But if you look at a household income, it's a totally different picture.
To some degree, yes. And for some people, that will be an acceptable answer. I think for others, they would quite legitimately say, no, I as an individual, as a woman, I want to have the same pension rights as men. And, that's fine too. So, but then that gets more challenging because of that earnings penalty. And, people do find their ways around that, but baked into the system because the burden of childcaring tends to fall more heavily on women, and that then has a penalty on terms of their income. So baked into the system is this effect that typically means that women's pensions end up slightly smaller than men's. And, the projections going forward over the decades to come show that whilst the gap is going to close, the steps the government has taken, the steps that employers have taken with childcare support are working. The gap doesn't enclose entirely. And then the other point I'd make is if you are splitting the pension rights unequally, so the man's building up a bigger pension, then, I hate to say it, but, divorce rights then become an important factor too. So that if you can't split up as a couple, it's really, really important the woman gets her fair share of his pension to reflect the fact she was off bringing up the kids while he was building up the pension pot.
Yes, if you've done that, is the pension then, whoever's got the biggest one, does that become a marital asset that has to be divided in some way?
Yes, it does, and it should be, but it doesn't always happen. And, you should look at the total wealth of the couple, and that should include all pension rights, and she can make a claim on his pension rights. Doesn't always happen. Lawyers don't always understand the complexities of the pension system, so you do see situations where women are hard done by in that regard as well. So, but you'd like to think hopefully that doesn't become a factor.
OK, Tom Mcphail, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.